to The Pivot, stories of people who made a change. My name is Andrew Osenga, and my guest today is Pete Enns. Pete is the host of a popular podcast called The Bible for Normal People. He's a professor. He is an author of a ton of books. He's an actual genius. And we need geniuses in our world today. We have this thing right now in our culture where if people are really smart and they've studied something and they work at a university and they're an expert, we don't trust them for some reason. It's very strange. I'm very glad that there are people who have spent their lives studying things and who know stuff that I don't know. And it's always really amazing when you get to talk to somebody who just knows things in a way that you never will. Literally, if somebody as smart as Pete was talking about snails, I would be fascinated, because anybody that just is that knowledgeable about anything, it's fascinating. But Pete is talking about things that matter deeply. He's talking about things that matter deeply to my life and my family and my work and my identity. Pete talks about the Bible in a way that I've not heard many people talk about the Bible. His whole thing is to help people look at the Bible in the way that it was originally meant to be read and received. Because the Old Testament, these were poems that were passed down around the campfire and passed down in song, or the New Testament, these were letters written to the church in a different city, and there was context, and there were things happening culturally, and people in that city would have known that when Paul said this, he was referring to this thing that was happening in Rome at the time, or that he was making a joke about this, or that he was referencing this story that everybody knew about, this folk story, or this old song, or things that we just don't get. So listening to Pete's podcast, reading his books has been really helpful for me. And I know for a lot of other people, sometimes these kinds of conversations can ruffle some feathers. They can be a little scary to some people because you can call into question things that you've kind of held really dear, or you've based a lot of your life decisions on. And that stuff can be really scary. So these kinds of conversations you have to really walk into delicately and carefully. So I appreciate how Pete handles that stuff with care. And I also know that you can have these conversations and not agree with everything and be friends, be civil, agree to disagree. Know that because we're looking at these texts that are 4,000 years old, we can kind of say, yeah, we're going to come at it with our best guess of what we think culturally was happening here. And we're going to trust that the Spirit is leading us to do what is right. It's a different way of looking at the Scripture than I was raised in. At the end of the day, we're still going to the Scripture and saying, this is what we are following and basing our lives on. It's just a different way of looking at it, and it's really fascinating. In this crazy era we're in of misinformation and distrust and anger and AI and just not being able to trust the things that we see, knowing how to look critically at something that we hold dear even, and hold it up to the light and examine it in a way that is caring and loving is really a skill that we have to develop. We have to develop it to know how we love our neighbor and love our families, how we enter into our careers, all these things. So I hope this conversation is a gift to you. It really was to me, and I know you're gonna love it. So here is me and Pete Enns. Where are you today? Are you teaching today?
No, not today. I don't teach. I only teach Tuesdays and Thursdays. And yes, it's a good gig if you can get it. And that's what my schedule is. And Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm either, writing something for a few hours or grading, prepping for classes, things
So what
like that.
classes are you
And
teaching
other stuff.
this semester?
I No, that's why I teach an intro to the Bible course for first year students. And I actually, unusually, I have two sections of that. So it's one prep and two sections. But I don't prep because I know who Moses is. I've heard of him, but they haven't. So I have to start really slow. Um, And I'm teaching a class on wisdom literature and
Oh,
Psalms as
wow.
well, which I love teaching that. That's an upper division course, 300 level
How many
course.
times
Yeah.
have you taught those classes?
Well, I mean, I taught seminary years ago too, so I've had sort of two
Yeah.
teaching careers, one graduate school, the other undergrad. But I've been there since 2012, and that's about 13 years, 14 years. I'm in my 14th
Hmm.
year, I guess. And I teach them on a cycle, so I'll teach the wisdom class every 2 years. So I probably taught it there 7 or 8
Wow.
times, roughly. Yeah,
Does it ever surprise you?
yeah. There's all sorts of stuff I
Hmm.
never noticed, and then one day my eyes are alert, and maybe I see something I didn't see before, and it's always the case. It doesn't. It's just there's too much there. You can't really grasp it all, and even if you memorize all of it, word for word in Hebrew, for heaven's sake, it doesn't mean you see it either. So yeah, it always evokes changes, re-examinations and things like that.
Love that. Well, so you invite people to ask questions and to talk about um, changing their mind. What is something that you've
Hmm.
changed your mind about?
How much time do you have? It's just, and I've changed my mind on a lot of things, and sometimes it's to like I used to know, but I don't think I know that
Hmm.
anymore. To I used to think this, but now I think something differently, and but that even shifts and changes. It's part of my faith expression is to live that way, and for other people, it's not comfortable, and I understand that. But for me, I feel I don't really have a choice in the matter because it's a matter of authenticity that I don't want to say something as if I know what I'm talking about when I feel that I really don't. And that's why
Hmm.
I'm open to change about pretty much anything, and even some of the most fundamental questions. So yeah, I'm sort of a moving target in a lot of respects, and it's not because I'm
Yeah.
wishy-washy. It's because I think I'm
Hmm.
earnest.
Have you always been that way?
Yeah, I've always been that way. I mean, ever since I can remember, and it's not a virtue. It's not like I'm a better person than somebody else. It's just I feel that if I say I'm going to believe something, I that means exploring it and being open to change. And if, especially with God, for heaven's sake, Andrew, I mean, we're talking about in our world today, the God of the possibly multiverse, and
At least
and
the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
exact something. I mean, that's weird, right? So it's really, yeah. I like how they built a time machine like in about an hour because Tony Stark's smart. Come on. Um, we live in a universe or perhaps multiple universes that are filled with mystery. We just don't know. And the more we see things, the more we see what we don't know, and things that were certain become less certain, not because science is stupid, but because science is skeptical
Yeah.
and it moves forward and it sees things and has to make measurements and tests and things like that. So, and let's not get the quantum world mixed up into this too, because that's a whole other universe, essentially, different math that governs it. So, if that's what the creation is like, for people of faith who believe in a creator, you just got to dial it down a little bit and move back a few steps and realize I'm not sure what I have really to contribute to this discussion. And the thought that, well, just the Bible tells you, is like, well, the Bible is itself, whatever you think about it being inspired or revealed or authoritative, it's still highly encultured in an Iron Age culture of all things. At least the Old Testament is, the New Testament is a little bit later. um, but where we see their own assumptions about the nature of reality coming through and how those assumptions affect how they talk about God.
Yeah.
And we find ourselves in the same position today. It's understanding the world around us affects how we think about God.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I was. I was raised to believe that Oprah was one of the seven seals of the judgment. So, just for instance.
Which one? Anyway, yeah, yeah, exactly.
um,
The one where there's silence in heaven afterwards or something. So
so you've written a lot of books. Did you always kind of think that you would be a writer? Like when you were a kid, was that something that you aspired to? No.
no, no, that's sort of a joke. Because if someone had told me that, and if someone had told me in high school or even college that one day I would be writing books and teaching people, I would have said they should spend less time in direct sunlight without wearing a hat because this is not going to happen. I was always a pretty good student, like a B to A student. I mean, I could do the work. Um, but in college, I was much more interested in playing baseball. So I did a lot, and did it afterwards a little bit for a while too. And so yeah, I was. There's a difference between being sort of
Hmm.
curious and being an academic. An academic means reading and studying and writing and having it critiqued and things like that. And that just wasn't on my radar screen until after college when I just very briefly, I had an experience where I was talking to a couple of friends of mine after high school graduation. We just got together, and one had become an atheist philosophy major, and the other was more of a fundamentalist Christian. And I wasn't a fundamentalist; I was a Christian, but not that. And they were going back and forth in a very good natured way, uh, debating the existence of
Yeah.
God, for example. And I was sitting there thinking, I have no idea what they're talking about. I just majored in baseball for 4 years and I don't really know what's happening. And that really awoke in me an academic spirit. And, I think it was for bad reasons. I felt
Hmm.
shamed and I wanted to sort of justify myself in a bit. And I probably became pretty, annoying to some people after that. But it was the beginning of a journey of doing something that I had never really done before, which is just do a lot of reading and thinking and listening and moving in that academic direction. I found myself in seminary about um, 3 years
Hmm.
later, and then after 4 years of seminary, doing doctoral work. So, but just sort of happened. I never planned it. I know people who said I knew I wanted to be a scholar when I was 15, and I was playing wiffle ball at 15. I just had no interest in any of that kind of stuff. Um, So it bothers me not to vent here, Andrew, but it bothers me when people look at me and they say, "You're an elitist academic." And like, I used to make fun of people like me. I'm not. That's not me at all. But I am an academic, and I take that seriously. And I think academia has something to offer people, even people who know a lot about the Bible, to hear different angles and why people might disagree with their positions. And I think that's very, very important in this day and
Hmm.
age.
Yeah. Are you surprised by some of the questions that kids come in with? Are they coming in with the same questions now that they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
Um, that's a really good question. I think, I teach at Eastern
Yeah.
University, undergraduates, and I it is a different setting because when I started there in 2012, you could sort of count on most students having some sort of a Christian education in their background, whether it's just, having the Bible in a church that they went to or their parents taught them the Bible or whatever it is. And they would come with, I think, a lot of questions, and those were really surrounding human
Hmm.
sexuality. Those are the big questions, and also God's violence is up there too. And I think they were looking for something. Many of them were looking for something more sustaining to them than just sort of taking forward their inherited
Yeah.
faith. Today, I think that still holds, but it's a different population. It's much more diverse. Um, Not that there weren't Jewish students at Easter before, but I've had Jewish students in my classes over the past 3, 4 years, not 12 years ago. I've had some Muslim students in
Hmm.
my classes, which are very interesting because Like they don't know enough to know they shouldn't ask certain questions about the Bible, but they really should be, and I wish other
I
people
bet
did
those are
too.
really fascinating
Um,
questions.
they're
Yeah.
fun, and the Muslim students I've had are so industrious and so interested in learning, even though this is a foreign language to them. They're there, they're playing a sport,
Hmm.
and they're there, and they actually want to do this kind of stuff. So that's great. But I'd say, if there's a shift, that maybe the shift that I'm seeing now that's a little more prevalent for some students is, why bother with any of this at all? Like,
Mm.
what sense does it make? And I, I I think that's always a good question to ask, because it gets you back to the basics of what you believe and what point you think there is in all this, without getting lost in all the intramural debates that Christians tend to have.
Yeah. And is your goal to try to convince them, or is your goal, what is your goal when they are asking those kinds of questions?
I think primarily my goal is to let them know that the Christian world allows these kinds of discussions and even encourages them, which is not what they hear on TV. It's like it's one thing or nothing, and that God can handle it. Maybe God even likes the questions, and who's being more genuine? Someone who has, let's say, been raised in a Christian home, and they come to college and it just doesn't make sense, and they realize they've just been doing what they're told. They've never taken this stuff internally. They never thought about it. And they're sort of done with it. Does that person, who's closer to the heart of God, that person or a person who never has questioned anything and is rather bullheaded about what they believe and won't listen to anyone else and just calls them heretics if you disagree with them? I think the first person is someone that I'm very interested in talking with and teaching. The others not so much. Now, I don't have students like that at Eastern. Well, occasionally I have had just students who really have their heels dug in, but that's few and far between, because most of them are too young. And plus, COVID ruined everything in terms of learning anything. So it's changed a lot. But there are always questions there from students. I guess they just change over time.
How did COVID change learning?
Um, I think it stopped happening for a lot of high school students. We have, AI is becoming a big thing
Yeah.
now, right? And
Yeah.
and everywhere, and it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It changes by the minute, and lo and behold, students have figured out they don't have to write a paper. They could just plug
Wait,
things
really?
in,
Really?
and yeah, believe it or not, and I think
You can't tell by the M
that
dashes? No.
coincided. Well, the M dash is yes, but also, darn it all, that's a beautiful piece of prose there. And I've seen you talk in class, and there's no way you wrote this. Or I had a take home project. It's not really a test, because they can use their books and stuff like that. On a course I teach on biblical interpretation, and I sort of take them through the paces of different eras of church history, one of which is the medieval period. And I like talking about that because it's fun. Anyway, one of the questions was, um, what, how would you define medieval hermeneutics, which is a fancy word, biblical
Mhm.
interpretation? And what's the key factor, all of which we discussed in class? What's the key factor? And also, we talked about this examples of this in class. Give two of those examples and just lay it out. Explain again what these are about. And I got a brilliant essay back on medieval economics. Now, I realize economics sounds a lot like the word hermeneutics, but that's why, at least spell check your search on ChatGPT. At least
It's
do that for me. So,
amazing.
um, but the thing is, what we found though, Andrew, is that uh, students now developed habits during high school, and we're seeing them in college, and students don't even see an ethical problem with outsourcing their education to a robot.
Mm.
I happen to like ChatGPT. I think AI is good for a lot of things. I use it on a semi-regular basis because it gives me details in certain searches I don't get from Google. And sometimes I want to ask, like, what remind me, like, what are the five major views on the date and composition of the book of Job? I know it. I just don't feel like getting all my books out right now. And it reminds me, oh, yeah, and I have to go back to this person, look
Sure.
at this, because I know the topic and it just helps me organize my thoughts. But that's very different than cranking out a paper and slapping your name on it. But that's what a lot of students are used to doing. And so it changes education. Like, can you really even assign papers? Because it's almost impossible to detect the use of
Hmm.
AI. There are so many false positives, like there are programs out there, and we've been told you can't use them because they're 30% in error. So it doesn't do any good. So it changes how you teach, it changes how you learn.
Yeah.
It's a thing. Yeah.
So do you do more in class discussion? Do you have people write in freehand? I mean,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Basically, what I do, especially for my first year students, is that 70%, 75% of their grade is based on tests and quizzes that are taken in class.
makes sense.
They're not hard, they're not difficult in the sense they're not rocket science. It's just, read these few pages. You'll have a 5-question test, and I'm going to ask you basic questions that if you read it once, you're going to be able to get
Hmm.
it. So I do that. And they have some writing assignments, but they're more
Hmm.
self-reflective assignments than, so, and we're trying to figure out what to do about research papers. It's there may be 1 in 20 students who will do it the right
Hmm.
way, but others will do some variety of AI, and it's hard to. I don't blame them in a sense. They're young. This is what they've learned, but I feel like education's being compromised in this sense, and we're all struggling. Every school is
Yeah.
struggling with what to do about this new phenomenon. It's different than Google,
Yeah.
whole different thing.
That
Yeah.
I imagine that robs you of the ability to have those deeper, richer discussions that is why people are paying all that money to go to, you know,
Exactly. Yeah.
those
Yeah. And
institutions.
that's a shame, I
Yeah.
think. I'm glad that I'm 64. I tell people I'm glad I'm not 34 and just starting out in
Mm.
this field because I don't know where it's going to go. I'm a little bit pessimistic, but people were pessimistic about,
Yeah.
laptops and about everything, and those things have turned out okay. So I mean, who knows? I'm not a hardened pessimist, but I am pessimistic about because I think this is different. This can you can crank out a dissertation if you want to using AI, and it's might be tempting for some people to
Yeah.
do that. And
Hmm.
uh, anyway, there's one last thing. There's a theologian I know. She teaches at Villanova. Her name is Ilia Delio, and she works a lot with science and religion, and also technology and religion. And she says this is the first time in the evolution of the human species where we are now contributing to our own development as a species.
Hmm.
And she means by that there will be, this is not science fiction, there will be computer chips implanted into us if we want them to, that gives us sort of like, an iPhone in our heads or something, or tattoos on your arms that you can look at that activate things, and you can sort of do this on your forearms. And the world, the species is going to become so interconnected that it could mean more understanding of other people, or it could mean more hostility towards other people,
Or
or
both. Yeah.
both. Yeah, which is
Yeah.
typically what it is, I think, in
Yeah.
human history. But and people are going to say, "I'm not going to have that done to me. You can't put a chip in me." Right? Just like people have said, I'm not going to use one of those
Yeah.
phones that lets you look things up. I'm not going to use a computer. A typewriter is good enough for me. I'm not going to use a typewriter. I'm going to write by hand. So, I mean, all these
What
things
was it? Yeah. It
happen. These
wasn't
revolutions
Aristotle
happened.
that was like, you don't write things down, or somebody,
Yeah,
because then we'll
right.
lose our
You'll
memories. Yeah.
you'll lose the memories, right? Yeah, and now it's more like we're losing the ability to think critically. That's what it is. If you can't, if you're not going to invest in your education, you're not going to learn to think critically, and that means thinking what the other person thinks. That person may be long dead, but at least trying to understand their world and what they're trying to say. And I think that's in jeopardy, frankly. And I'm not sure where that's going to put all other kinds of issues that we face in our world, how that's going to make things look. I don't know.
Yeah, I've felt that. I've had moments of wanting to ask ChatGPT a question and realizing I need to shut my computer and think this through because I can figure this
Yeah.
out and it'll be better for
Hmm.
me. Yeah.
Right.
Even if I'm wrong, it'll be better for me to think it
Yeah.
through.
Oh, here's a great thing though. I need ideas for a kid's party for under $200 or
Yeah.
something. I mean, and things like that. It's like, okay, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. Just it's like talking to your
Mhm.
buddy, but that's not critical thinking. That's just like I just need an idea and I don't know
Yeah.
how to do this.
ChatGPT helped me figure out what was wrong with some sensor on my Toyota Sequoia the other day that my
Nice. Okay.
mechanic
Well, there
couldn't
you go.
figure out.
Yeah. Right.
Crazy. Like that was
The world's
awesome.
a better place. The
Yeah.
world's a better place. I know.
Okay, I have a question for you that I have actually been very,
Yeah.
very curious about. Um,
Okay.
so a lot of people look to you as a trusted voice, and
Hmm.
often those people find you after they have had trust broken by other leaders.
Hmm.
How do you feel about that? How do you handle that?
Um, I feel like I have to be pretty careful because,
And let
and
me
some of
actually
this
let
is
me let
not
me ask:
hard. I sort of
am I
do.
right? Do you
Uh-huh.
is that true? Is that's my perception of
Yeah, it is. Yeah, that is true. Yeah, that not of everyone, but that's certainly a segment of people who wind up reading my stuff
yeah.
or listening to our podcast and things like that. So, but it makes me, and I'm very aware of that, and I tend to, I try not to be mean to other people because they might be watching that sort of thing. Sometimes
I
it's
see
hard,
you. I see
but I
you
try
kind
for
of
it.
pull yourself back. Like you, it's really wonderful watching you deal with that publicly
Well, thanks for noticing. Sometimes
because
I
you
don't,
verbalize
but
that process
it's
sometimes.
I do. Yes, I do. And sometimes, it's like answer a fool, don't answer a fool. There are times to answer a fool. When do you do it? How do you do it? That's what you have to figure out. And there are times when I feel people are being more abusive and just want to argue for the sake of arguing, that I will say exactly what I think they're doing and then say, you probably want to go elsewhere. You don't want to do this here because you're not going to get any traction. And they come back anyway and they keep trying. And every once in a while, I block people, but I think I can, in all my years, I think I've probably blocked like 20 people at the most. And that's over a lot of time doing this. So I try to be not mean. I do tend to say things like, this is my opinion. This is how I see it. This is how I put the pieces together. But that really comes from my academic
Mm.
training, because it's not like, well, you have a PhD and I know everything. No, what you learn, at least I learned, and others in my classes learned in our doctoral program, is that we don't know everything, and there's so much more to discover and to understand, that I feel it's a dereliction of duty if I don't say, in my opinion. Well, aren't you sure? I'm pretty sure I'm right, but I could be wrong. But I'm just telling you, this is what I think, and you don't have to agree with
Mm.
me. I'm not trying to force this on anybody, but this is how I see it. And I think that's respecting that space. The last thing people need is another dictator in their lives trying to tell them what to do in every corner of their lives. I'm just not going to do that.
I think we like that right now.
I'm trying. I know. Well, yeah. Not to
No,
get into
sorry.
all that,
Yeah.
but yeah, yeah, that's right. Don't worry. I could. I just don't want to. Um, but even there, I mean,
Hmm.
politically, right? I mean, there are people on a side that I can't fathom why they would be on that side, but
Hmm.
they are. And I know they have problems with the other side, but it's not nearly as bad as the problems on the other side. But even there, if I can't show respect for people and what they think, I'm really being hypocritical because, when I had difficulties at, Westminster Theological Seminary, where I left back in 2008, um, over
Yeah.
doctrinal controversial issues, which really weren't controversial, but that's just my opinion. Um, you know, I had to, well, first, I really had to navigate conservative waters, and I got to understand how to talk to people more conservative than you, and telling them what to do or how stupid they are or silly things like that, that never works.
Yeah.
So I try to understand them, and I want to show them respect, that I understand what they're saying. I really do understand what you're saying. I do want to tell you, though, that I disagree with you, and here's why. So at least they feel heard, which is annoyingly difficult to do. You
Yeah.
know, I just want to blast people sometimes, but I try not to. And that's all a part of creating a different kind of culture, really, than some people might be used to, where they've been told what to do and what to think in church their whole lives, and they come out of that and they have somebody else doing that for
Mm.
them. So, on our podcast, the Bible for Normal People, we intentionally have people on who are just excited about something, and we give them the rein to talk about what they want to talk about and what they're excited about from their work. We'll ask questions to sort of elicit that. Um, and it's just for that purpose, to say, listen, people, there are people who think differently about these things that you used to think there's only one way to
Yeah.
think about, but you're seeing it's much more complicated, and people appreciate that kind of creating of a bit of breathing room for investigating their own faith. So I think that's all the part of the responsibility of being curators of that kind of a
Mm.
culture.
Yeah. That's really thoughtful.
Hmm.
Okay.
I try to be.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I try to be.
Yeah, I imagine it's a
Every
high
once in a
wire
while, I hit
act.
it. Yeah, yeah, you're kidding.
Okay,
Yeah,
you have
okay.
a segment in your podcast, Pete ruins a book of the Bible.
Yeah.
Um, how did tell me about that segment, because I love it. I think it's fantastic. And how did you come up with that segment? Like, where did that come from?
Okay. Well, I mean, it's early on. I would do solo podcasts on individual books of the Bible, but I didn't call it Pete Ruins. That came out of a podcast. This is a few years ago, like within the first 5, 6 years of the podcast. I came out with one talking about, like, Isaiah 7:14 and the alleged predictions of Jesus's birth in the Old Testament, and I just called it Pete Ruins Christmas. And so we talked about this stuff, and so it just sort of caught on, and we started using it for everything, and we've gone back, and I used to do I did a podcast many years ago on, like, Ecclesiastes and Proverbs, and it's just, 7 things you want to know about Proverbs. We just rebranded those as Pete Ruins Proverbs. And the point of ruining is, I mean, some podcasts probably do more ruining than others, but
Sure.
it's really, listen, here's what's going on in this book, Exodus or whatever, and here's how, what it seems to be saying, but there are other options here. And so bringing biblical scholarship into this, and for our audience, that's usually very helpful, because that's why they're
Yeah.
there. They're looking for different models, different paradigms for understanding the faith. That's not, just the Bible says it, I believe it, and that settles it. And if you don't agree, you're probably in danger of incurring God's wrath, if not landing literally in hell for disagreeing. So we try to do something different.
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely raised. This is what it means. There's one
Hmm.
interpretation. It's this.
Yeah.
And I was probably in my 20s when I started hearing that there were multiple ways that you could interpret a
Hmm.
piece of scripture, and it was terrifying at first. I mean,
Yeah.
truly terrifying because I was so,
Hmm.
yeah, because there was such weight and such danger attached to that.
Yeah. Because if you're wrong about any one thing, the whole thing could fall apart.
Mm.
If you start questioning the little things, then, well, how do you know you're right about the big things? And my answer to that is typically you don't. You don't know you're right about the big things. These are matters of faith. And that's something that people of faith, Jews and Christians, have had discussions and dialogues and debates about, not just digging their heels in, which is what we tend to do today. And that's a bit simplistic, but I'm going to stand by it. And another simplistic thing I like to say is I think a lot of the roots of a lot of this are in the growth of the modern period. You have the
Mm-hmm.
Reformation, which people like John Calvin especially said that Scripture has one and only one meaning. And our job is to find what that is. During the medieval period, they had multiple levels of meaning.
Mm.
And that was a respectful view of Scripture because this is it's like a prism or something, right? You take it and you turn it, and whichever way you turn it, it refracts the light differently, and sort of the Bible becomes like that. You turn it certain ways, you see it differently. But with the rise of people like Calvin, who a lot of people hate, he was brilliant. I disagree with a lot of what he says, but he was not an idiot.
Mm.
Um, he was very modern, and he said, listen, the Bible is one meaning. Here's how you get it. You just got to know Greek and Hebrew, and you have to interpret it according to what the sense of the words are. It's as simple as that. Of course, it's not simple because people disagree on what the Hebrew or Greek says. That's never, a guarantee you're going to have the one right answer. But that when you sort of fold that together with the rising of the scientific method and how do the planets move? Well, there aren't multiple options. There's one option. You got to find it out. It's called math, and or just observation with a telescope. And I think that sort of affected how Christians began to think about the nature of the faith, that it's one thing. What does this text mean? It's not whatever you want it to mean. It means one thing. And that's the Protestant Reformation in a sense. And so the Reformation came and went, and all of a sudden you don't have like one group of Protestants who are hanging out together, just finally getting down to what the Bible means. But they can't agree on what the Bible means. And so you got Lutherans, you have Methodists, you have Baptists, you have Anabaptists, you have Presbyterians, you have all these different groups. And now we have, how many denominations do we have in the Protestant world? And I think Wikipedia says it's like 30 or 40,000, which is not accurate. Because they're just counting some things as separate, which aren't. But there are probably a few thousand, even if it's just 1 or 2,000, even if it's 100,
It's a
that's a
lot.
lot. It's a lot. It's the Bible is our rule of faith, and we only believe what it says. Um, that's great until you start reading it and you start seeing the reason why people have different opinions on things because the Bible says different things in different
Mm.
places. And and that causes a lot of anxiety for people,
Yeah,
right? Right,
it
as you
did.
did. I never had that phase, by the way. I wasn't raised as a biblicist fundamentalist. My parents were German immigrants, and I definitely grew up with a faith in God and Jesus. I had little experiences as a child, even, but it was never about like, well, let's read the Bible together. That's just something Europeans don't do very
Mm.
often. And so I was spared a lot of that stuff, but I know the mentality because I've lived in it, for much of my life. I mean, really starting when I was about 15 or 16 years old. That was a part of my life. And so I understand the fear. And part of what I do is to try to help people just through example after example after example say you don't have to be afraid of what the Bible
Mm.
is. And if you're clutching your way of thinking, I mean, I wrote a whole book about that called The Sin of
Yeah.
Certainty, right? It's not sinful to have certainty about things, but it's sinful if you're clutching to a way of thinking, even if your mind and heart are telling you there's got to be something else. It means we're afraid of the exploration. We're afraid of essentially putting our own theology to the side and saying, I need to look at this afresh. And then lo and behold, you realize people have been thinking about these sorts of things since the beginning of Christianity itself, and even earlier. These are we have very few new questions to ask of this tradition, and that's a good thing to get to, to rather than faith means standing still, right? I'm sure you know Rachel Held Evans, right, who died about 6 years ago now, just over 6 years ago. But she had this thing called evolving faith, which they had two or three gatherings. The first when she was alive, the second when she no longer was. And I in one of my talks, I spoke there a couple times, and I made the point that, and I think this is true, evolving faith is redundant.
Huh.
Faith always evolves or changes. It never stays the same because we're human beings, we're growing, we're developing. I do not think about God the same way now that I did when I was 24, 25, or
How could
30.
you?
Thank God for everybody involved,
Yeah.
thank God. And for myself, how could you, right? You live, you breathe, you experience things. And that's why, how we think about God and talk about God is always affected by our experiences and our intuitions even. And you've probably heard in your context, don't trust your intuitions, don't trust your feelings, your experiences. Those things are irrelevant. That's what makes us human. That's what drives us to do things. Ian McGilchrist, the neuroscientist, he says, we're not thinking beings with emotions. We're emotional beings who think. Our emotions are always involved. Our experiences, our intuitions are always involved in how we think about God. And to accept that, I think, is just simply to honor our humanity. But what about the Bible? Yeah, the biblical writers are doing the same thing. They're writing about God from their experiences and from their intuitions and from their worldviews. And how can anybody ever escape that? Yeah, but God inspired the Bible. Okay, fine. But what he inspired is a book where people talk about the same thing differently because of who they are. So you can never, even if you want to say God wrote the Bible out specifically, okay, then he wrote it. God's not a he, but he wrote it, then mimicking the voices of humanity that contradict each other. And, to me, that's for people like you were, that's a scary thought. For others, it's like, oh, now I see it. And now it's like, now it's not fear producing to read this book.
Yeah.
And it's not giving me a false sense of mastery over it. Like I have all the answers and I've got the theology. You realize that this Bible is more of an invitation to communion than it is the divine answer book that answers all the questions we might have. That's freeing to
Yeah.
me.
Well, I love what you said a minute ago, that this idea that going back to John Calvin, kind of giving this impression of scripture as meaning one thing and one thing only.
Yeah.
I'm a songwriter. I live in a community of songwriters. Nothing that
Mm-hmm.
we write means one thing and one thing only.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
when you put it that way,
Yeah.
it seems obvious that, of course, a book half of poetry couldn't
Mm-hmm.
mean one thing and one thing only.
Yeah.
And
Especially intentionally ambiguous poetry.
yeah,
I mean, they don't really tell you. Here's a hint of how you should understand
yeah,
this. Like the Psalms, like where is the Lord in the midst of all my enemies? And it's like it doesn't define the enemy. It's like what are your enemies right now, and how do you read this, and how do you understand it? So yeah, I agree with you
I mean,
completely.
that's the best writing, is the writing that means so many things at the same time. And you go, that's for me,
Right.
and that's for you, and that's for all of
Mm-hmm.
us. That's wonderful.
there are levels of meaning that you can see within the Hebrew Bible
Mm.
itself when later authors look at earlier authors and take them in very different directions. You can see it in the New Testament where it uses their own scripture, the Hebrew Bible, and take it in directions that the original writers never would have
Mm.
imagined, you know? And I think creatives see that in a way that many Christians, again, this may be your church context as well, but many Christians are taught be logical, be analytical. These words mean one thing. Don't stray from the words. It's almost like an engineer, kind of thing. And it's I think the faith is much more poetic and creative than any of that. And ironically, it's my study in a highly analytical, research oriented context, which included studying the history of interpretation, that really pushed me and said, it's rather obvious what's going on
Mm.
here. We have a collection of creative documents, poetic like documents, some of which are actually poetry, that are trying to get at something that words aren't really designed to do, at least fully adequately. And again, for some people, they take comfort in that, as I do, but other people are scared to death, and I understand that. I want to give those people who are scared to death sort of a safe way to talk
Yeah.
about this, even if they can't tell their pastor. They can at least be a part of our online community and talk about
Yeah.
things. And you know,
A gift for me was that I started traveling as a musician when I was 19 years old. And I got in the Christian music business, which I didn't necessarily want to be, but that's where I ended up. But I started playing at all these different churches and youth groups and colleges. And before I even
yeah,
really understood what a denomination was, I
mm-hmm,
had Methodist friends and Baptist friends and Presbyterian friends
yeah,
and Seventh day Adventist friends and Catholic friends. And so by the time I started learning theological differences, I already knew that I liked these people and that they loved Jesus and that they were doing cool things in
right,
their community and that they were nice to me. And I couldn't demonize them and say that one was right and one was wrong because I already knew them.
right,
And that was and that
yeah,
was
exactly,
I think that was such a gift to me to be able to enter into these conversations already having those relationships.
I think that makes all the difference, and that's why I think all theological debates should take place at a bar or at a
Dude, I
restaurant
could not
where
agree
people are
more.
just no, it's hard to get angry with
Once you
people
know them.
when once you know them and have spent a little time with them. And um I mean, this is typical. This is not just a part of the life of Westminster Theological Seminary, where I was for 14 years teaching. Before that, I was a student. But all deliberations were done around a big conference table.
Hmm.
And I mean, there's a certain professionalness to that and neatness
Mm-hmm.
to that, but nothing ever got accomplished there of any interest in terms of like theological differences. It just led to, okay, you're sitting on that side, we're sitting on this side kind of thing.
Hmm.
And it just didn't work very well. It'd be much better say, guys, can we just like rent a room someplace at a restaurant and just eat together? But it doesn't work that way
Hmm.
typically. See, that's why it becomes the faith then is not an embodied thing, literally an embodied thing. It's an abstract intellectual exercise. And you don't need to know other people to look at the faith that way. And I think that's a really blanket statement here, but I think that's part of the legacy of the modern period of
Hmm.
the church is to reduce the faith to apologetics. Not that all apologists reduce it to
Sure.
apologetics, but some do,
Sure.
it seems like. And they just defend it as an intellectual thing, and they wonder why people don't listen to them and why it's just boring the daylights out of people because it's forgetting that this is not just a mental exercise. It involves the mind. It always involves the mind. But the mind has to know its place in all of this. And the mind is dealing with mystery as well at the same time. So, and the Bible doesn't take away mystery. It even tells us, Christ is the
Yeah.
mystery revealed
Yeah.
to us, which doesn't mean that, oh, now we get it all. No, Christ is the mystery that God is showing to us. That means Jesus is the mystery as far as I'm concerned. And that again is a place that might foster discussions instead of just polarizing and debating and things like that.
Oh. Do you have time for one last question?
Sure
Okay.
do. Yep.
I'm a parent. I've got 3 daughters. 2 are in college, and one's in middle school.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you give to parents who want to raise their kids to be able to enter into these kinds of
Mm-hmm.
conversations? How do we raise our
Yeah.
kids to approach this stuff with wisdom?
Well, I think I've thought about that. And I've thought about it in part because I don't know if I did a good job doing that myself. I have 3 children who are all in their 30s now. And we get along great, but I look back and they've reminded me of things that just, I wish I had done things better. But I think what I would want to do going back is I would want to create a home where there's less anxiety about things and to model a posture of respect for the tradition, but also curiosity about the tradition, and being very quick to say, "Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I'm glad you asked that, but maybe I know people have thought about that a lot. I'm not really sure. Here's sort of what I think. What do you think? And rather than that kind of a conversation being, again, a source of anxiety for parents, like we're supposed to know everything. How dare you? How dare you model to your children that you've got this down, that you've mastered the gospel, you've mastered the Bible, you've mastered God? It makes no sense. Model for the kids that maybe it's this is a lifelong exploration and maybe a gentle one, hand in hand with Jesus as you walk forward and not, a sword drill, like some churches have, like pick the Bible verse, how much
Oh,
do
I,
you
I
know?
won a lot of sword drills, Pete.
I didn't know what a sword drill was until my Eastern students told me because I was spared all that. I never went to a youth group meeting either as a child. So I'm so far ahead of the curve here. It's so funny. But I know that world and I can speak into it because I was a part of it in different
Yeah.
ways, But I think just, creating a climate where they don't need therapy when they're 20 to get over this stuff when it's based on fear and a transactional deity who, if you do this, God will be good to you. If you don't do this, and God will be mean to you, or and not to bring. I mean, the wrath of God is a complicated thing in the Bible, but when people hear that word, they think God's basically pissed off at me all the time and everybody else, and I better watch my step. I mean, that's not the kind of foundation to give a child about an all powerful entity. And I don't care what people think the Bible says. That's a very unwise thing to do for children. And there are better ways to bring them into a faith that's rooted in compassion and mercy and love of others and humility than one where you feel you have to know everything. And sometimes you actually convince yourself that you do
Mm.
until other people come around, and then you either lose your faith entirely or you just become a hardened defender of your own position, and none of which are conducive to human flourishing.
There you go. All right.
That's what I think. So, of course, this is to preface, that's all my
Yeah.
opinion,
Well, if
but I do hold
we
it.
had
That's my
another hour,
opinion.
we
I
could
do.
invent a time machine and go back and do that instead,
I know.
right?
Get
Yeah.
Tony Stark here to do that for us. Right?
Well,
Anyway.
some suggestions for you if you want to, since I know you've probably ruined all the 66 books of the Bible at this point. Not quite.
Not quite, but yeah,
Well,
we're
because you
getting
could start, I thought you could start ruining other books. You know, Green Eggs and
there.
Ham, What to Expect When You're Expecting,
Okay.
The Grapes of Wrath. So if you ever want to, you know,
Okay.
go in on
Yeah.
another podcast, we could do one together and we could just ruin some other
If
books.
if I get done with the biblical books first, which I think I should be able to do by the time I'm 90
Call
or
me.
95.
Yeah.
I calculated. So yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Anyway.
Pete, thank you so much for making time to
Sure,
chat. This has
Andrew.
been
Yep.
just amazing. What a treat to get to talk to you.
Yep. Happy to do it. Glad you
Yeah.
asked me. So I made another friend. So that's great.
Love it. Well, if people, I'll put all the links and stuff, but if people are just listening and they want to know where to find you, how do they get to listen to the podcast and connect with the community that you've built?
Sure. Just go to thebiblefornormalpeople.com and everything's there. And I also have my own social media channels on. I don't do Twitter. I hate Twitter.
Worst.
But I do TikTok.
You are. You're on
I'm
TikTok.
on TikTok. I love TikTok is fun. But TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, I'm on those pretty regularly.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you get back to grading papers. Pete, thank you so much for your time.
All right.
See
Thanks,
you, man.
Andrew. Appreciate it.
I told you, a genius, right? If you want to hear more from him, and I know you do now, you can turn this podcast off and go listen to his, The Bible for Normal People. We'll have links in the show notes. If you want to read a book that's not his, you can read my book. It's called How to Remember: Forgotten Pathways to an Authentic Faith. You can get that at all the same places. You can get Pete's book. We'll be back with some more amazing episodes next week. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you are watching, click subscribe, all those things. And it is so fun to be back here with you guys on The Pivot. Glad we're doing this, and I hope you are too. If there's things that you would like to see, suggestions, questions, please let us know. And we'll be back next week. All right, now go do something awesome.